I think so. So speaking of unbiased, let's get to it. Let's get to the industry news, and really we should call this week in Google, Google Cloud specifically, because this last week was Google Cloud Next annual conference, and I'm going to lead off with a story. We're going to have like 5 different stories on Google here today, talking about what they did. But specifically, I want to use a piece of analysis by Tom Krazit from Runtime. We're big fans of his. He produces a bunch of really good, insightful, enterprise-focused analysis. And he pointed out a few things. The first is that the attendance of Google Cloud Next actually rose by 50%, from 20,000 visitors or attendees rather to 30,000. That is not at all insignificant, and it speaks volumes to sort of the state of play. And as he points out, as Krazit points out, I think that what is interesting is we're in this really interesting period of almost a reset in terms of the impact that AI is having on the enterprise tech landscape. And to a certain extent, the market has sort of pivoted all the way back to, I think Krazit is sort of making it sound like it favors Google. I don't know if I would go that far, but it has certainly leveled the playing field and given Google a second opportunity, because they sort of missed the boat go round one when it came to the cloud and the enterprise space, right? They really ended up ceding that to both AWS, Amazon, and Microsoft via Azure. And they've always sort of been like this distant third. And there's an opportunity here for them to really get back into this game wholeheartedly. Although, as we talked about on the show, they've been sort of trailing behind on the AI side from OpenAI and Anthropic and vis-a-vis that, Microsoft and Amazon. So I don't think this is a sure thing. I think, Krazit is probably a little bit more bullish than I am in terms of it. But it is, I will say, in the last literally like 2 months, I've seen some really positive signs, right? Some of their leadership in terms of the things they're producing, some of what they're talking about. So I think I'm watching with I'm very interested, very curious, and sort of hopeful. Look, I think it's good for the industry if Google's a strong player here. So, I mean, that was we'll get into the details, but from broad strokes, I mean, what's your take on sort of where Google was playing and positioning here?
Yeah, I think that Google has been challenged because they honestly, when they first came out with Google Cloud, Google did not understand enterprise problems. The standard enterprise challenges go around, start with enterprise applications and relational databases and data warehouse, basically your source of truth and the key applications you use. And Google was always thinking an order of magnitude higher than that, of how to connect a billion people together, just a challenge that most businesses frankly do not care about. And so Google was talking about everything at that scale. And it took a while for enterprise problems to scale up to the point where Google has always kind of made its bread and butter. But with the emergence of AI, everything is much more complicated. You use a lot more data, you use it more quickly, you start needing things like Kubernetes to a greater extent, you start needing global networks, you start needing to manage data at petabyte scale and do this on an ongoing basis in production. And Google is finally able to say, oh, great, here's all the stuff that we've been doing this entire time. And now we can start figuring out how to productize it.
Well, you might be being a little generous, in my opinion. I think, I think there's a degree of hubris, right? Back when the cloud first hit, the cloud, Google was the 800-pound gorilla. They arguably still are the 800-pound gorilla, but they sort of had this attitude. I mean, they were doing this moonshot stuff, right? I think that they even called them that, right? And they sort of took this attitude. It's like, if it's good enough for us, it should be good enough for you. Don't ask, And whereas people like AWS and Microsoft in particular, even more than AWS, in my opinion, to your point, really focused in and honed in on what are the problems that enterprise IT organizations are facing and how do we make their life simpler and easier, and not just sort of accept this, hey, just don't ask questions sort of thing. So I think it's in part what you said. I do think the challenges that the enterprise are facing in the era of AI are becoming more complex and are getting closer to sort of Google's strengths and sweet spots. But I also think that Google has, they got enough beatings that they have recognized that they got to play ball. And I think they've done a much better job of starting to speak enterprise language, coming up with pricing models that are much more amenable for the enterprise, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think it's a combination of both. And I do think, as you alluded to a moment ago, this, at least some of the announcements we're going to highlight, I guess, are definitely sort of in line with that, right? There clearly some signaling here about making this more approachable for at least large enterprises. I still think they're not a great play if you're on the smaller end of the spectrum, but at least for large enterprises, they're a play. So